Shabbat Shalom. Modim L'Simcha, Shabbat Shalom. I remember years ago when I first saw my children noticing as we were driving in our cars or walking through the streets, seeing homeless people. And it was upsetting to them, and it's still upsetting to them, because they could see the hardship. I've heard this from other parents as well. And they have questions. How could this happen to them? And how can we help? And there was also this sense of wondering, what does it mean not to have a home? Having all kinds of questions. Could it happen to them? Sense of vulnerability. Their sense of vulnerability. It made them ask questions. How could our world allow this to happen? That people who don't have a home. And I often remember when I see homeless people, thinking of a teacher at rabbinical school, a very noted scholar and successful. And she said whenever she saw a homeless person, she thought two paychecks away from that. We have our vulnerability of not having a shelter and all that entails loss of security and stability and safety. And it's been part of our experience this past year of seeing what's been going on in Israel, that suddenly seeing that their shelter is no longer safe. The shelter of our Israeli brothers and sisters. And this is the shock of it. Cities invaded, terrible acts committed, even the safe rooms now working as safe rooms because they were not designed for infiltrations. It made us question everything. I've often repeated this, but the idea they put fridges in front of their doors at night because of this sense of their shelter no longer a shelter. And our own vulnerability here, a sense, even as we don't know how real or not it is, but that wearing a Jewish marker is not always safe. Putting an Israeli flag, not always safe. Seeing and feeling that vulnerability on one hand makes us realize we do need a dependable shelter. In Israel, they need the shelter. And they're essentially going to war and hardship because they cannot live in a space that's vulnerable. They need a safe country, a shelter for them, and for those who are without a home to return home. In the American Jewish community also, seeking ways to feel more sheltered, more protected. So there's also a place where we contemplate that fragility, we contemplate what it means not to have a shelter. It also leads us to very deep thoughts about life itself. What gives us well-being? What is it that gives us that sense of protection in life? What is the nature of life? How can the world and life be so cruel? And how can there be so many people in our world suffering in this way? On every side. There are also millions of Gazans who don't have a real roof over their heads or any security or shelter. And this is also part of how we are walking into our Sukkot this year. We're going into our booths where we host and we pray and try and find joy. Sukkot is Man Simchatenu, the time of our joy after the holidays. But this year they also remind us how fragile these structures really are. The walls are barely there, the roof has holes, the wind and rain can easily get in, there's no floor. As life itself, temporary, unknown. And yet we do our best to decorate it with objects we love and spend time in it with the people that we love. They remind us on some level, all of life is like a sukkah. We try to keep building firm walls around it, and a roof above our heads. But then when we least expect it, all gets torn down. We realize the solidity, just an illusion. Just as we read this morning, vanity of vanities, all is vanity, says Kohelet, Solomon, and all the books attributed to him in the Tanakh. This is the one that's considered to be the wisdom, the sad but deep wisdom of his old age. Or more literally, as scholars now say, it was fleeting breath of fleeting breaths. All of life is a fleeting breath. And so we see the sukkah some years and we think, this is more like what our lives are in this world like, more than the strong houses that we inhabited. Disease, catastrophe, war, very few people seem to be able to avoid it. In some years, it feels even especially true, the rest that we read. It reminds us of that verse from Kohelet, there is nothing new under the sun. And here we go again, another round of war, another round of human hopes and fears and dreams and nightmares all coming back. Good and bad and everything in between. All is fleeting, all is fragile, as that shallow breath. All is a sukkah. And so therefore in that book, Kohelet asks, well, what matters then? What are we doing here in this world if everything is like that sukkah? And again, on one hand, the answer is completely, we take care of the very real world needs. We build shelters. We do what we can to bring warmth and comfort wherever we can. We make it happen for us and for all those who are in need. When you don't have a shelter, it makes you realize how important a shelter is. The solution is a shelter. On the other hand, it also takes us to this very profound place, which is an important place where we ask those questions as individuals when we go through what we go through as families. What is important in life if life is like a sukkah? Because we never know what will happen to our health, to our future. What do we focus on? What are our lives about? There's a Hasidic story about a man who was known in the whole village as a simpleton. And one day there was a local wealthy merchant who decided to have some fun with him. And he said, here, I'm going to give you this stick. This stick you can only give to someone who is more foolish than you are, and I'm handing it to you. You can only give it to someone who is more foolish than you. So the simpleton took his job very seriously, and he went all around, and he couldn't find anybody who was more foolish than he was. So after a very, very long time, eventually he comes back to the rich man, and he tells him his predicament. He can't find anybody to give the stick to. In the meantime, the wealthy man has become mortally ill. He's on his bed. And the simpleton says, oh no, what happened to you? And he says, oh, just suffering. He told him about the disease that he has and shares his deep fear with him. He says, I feel I've wasted my life because I can't take all of this that I spent so much time of my life building, can't take that with me into the next world. So the simpleton thinks for a minute, and then he gives him his stick. And he says, you spent your whole life accumulating all of this money, and now it's not going to help you at all with where you are going next. I think you're an even bigger fool than I am. Life is a sukkah. It makes us ask, what do we take with us? Realize, reminding us what is important, building our qualities, spending time with our soul, bringing love to others because love transcends everything. And to really think, how do we wish to spend our time in this world, what we can take with us? We see everything that we're building is ultimately just a temporary shelter. We may try and surround ourselves with the thickest walls, but can't hide that fact sometimes, that truth, that life is that sukkah. And perhaps on a collective level also, we are taken to realize that life is a sukkah. It forces us as a society to ask the questions, who are we? What is important? What should be at the center of ourselves? When the walls are letting in the wind and the floor is negligible and the roof is leaky, you can also look up the stars and remember, what are we doing here? And see far off and think about things that we usually do not. Try and recenter and refine who we are and where we're going. And everything we are going through then becomes an opportunity. Who are we as a Jewish people? What is Israel about? What do we want to be about? And this reasoning has been forced on us so many times through the millennia, from traveling to the desert to this very day. Reminds us of the preciousness of having a home. We do all we can to always bring our homes shelter and safety and to all those in need. It reminds us what is important in life, to keep remembering and refining who we are. Finally, also reminds us that the only real shelter is even beyond all that, only in ourselves. And that Sukkah is called also in our tradition the Tzila de Mehemnuta, the shelter of faith. As we find on Yom Kippur, that faith, who we are, what it's all about, as we have over the millennia. The faith that there is more to life than even having a strong shelter. There is a place where even if you don't have a shelter, even when the walls are rickety, you can find some peace. You can transcend all the need for everything else, even when we don't have it. And we can touch on that place even when there is turmoil, even when there is difficulty, even when nothing makes sense. There is a place where you can still feel that shelter and that peace. And once you find that place, you can go and live anywhere, whatever life brings you. So we walk into a Sukkot this year with that powerful realization. Life is a sukkah. Life has really been a sukkah these past months. We also try and find that intention to bring relief and shelter to all those who need it, and also to find that strength within us from finding that place beyond the shelter, that place where there is just strength, stillness, and peace. Shabbat Shalom.